Okay, so in this video I'm just going to create a platformer example, side view platformer, where you run around and jump and maybe do some other stuff. In previous videos I showed how to do animation states, how to like create your own movement and change animations, that sort of thing. But in this video I thought I'd do things a little differently by using some built-in behaviors and show why you might use them and that sort of thing. This video will be unedited so that you could get most of the process involved. So I guess starting off we need to create a sprite object right here, and this will hold the animations for the player character. In this case it has a default animation, but we can change the size of it. In this case we'll just use 32 by 32 since it'll be like a low resolution game, and this is just placeholder art, so I'll just create the character. If you haven't done this sort of thing, I'm just showing this so that it might be a little helpful to understand the whole process involved. So basically I just created one frame down here, and I could add another one if I wanted. I could rename this idle. Actually, let's just make it lowercase. It's good to have a pattern to how you, a naming convention to how you name your animations, just so that you could remember them more easily. So let's duplicate that one and rename it to walk. And in this case, let's just add a frame and change the way it looks. And over here you have when you click on animation, over here it shows properties, so you can change the speed. In this case I'll do 15 frames per second, and I'll loop it since it's a walking animation. The idle animation, we don't need to loop that, I don't think. You could have a looping animation if you want though. So idle walk, and then let's duplicate this one, make a jump, and duplicate that, make a fall, slow, and drag it down just to order them. Come on, drag. Why is it not moving? Oh, that's I created a folder instead. I don't know how that happened. Duplicate, fall. Okay, so now we have jump, fall. We can change the jump one to make it maybe his arms are raised up, and maybe his leg is up a bit like that. And oh, for some reason, if you see here when I'm clicking these down here, it shows the frames. For some reason the idle animation got the walk animation frame. So you gotta be careful when you're clicking these. Sometimes it doesn't change the animation. Sometimes, like if you've created a new animation, it doesn't like update which one's selected. I don't know why that's the case. It's probably a bug in Construct, but that's just something to look out for. So in this case, it's not really an easy way to copy frames to other animations, unfortunately. This is another problem or another bug, things that could be improved but probably won't, just because I don't know. So in this case, just like if you have a bunch of frames that you did and you realize they're in the wrong animation, I could just rename this. I know it's a little stupid, but it is what it is. Sometimes you just have to kind of deal with issues when they crop up, because there might not be any other way around it. So we got the idle animation now with the correct frame, and the walk animation with 2 frames. Jump, you can get rid of this extra frame in the jump. Oh, oops. Delete, delete. Okay, jump, and then fall. Delete that, and then just for the fall, we can maybe have the arms out, and maybe the legs look something like that. I don't know. So jump, fall, walk, idle, and the jump. You can see the walk. We have to reset the looping to the walk animation, and idle. Set that back to what it should be. Okay, so now we have that. We have a basic character. I know that's a little long-winded. Takes a bit of time to set up just a character for the video, but I thought I would go through the process just to show you. And up here, I want snapping to the grid, and I'm going to change this to 8. That way we just could position stuff more easily. Okay, so we have this character here, and we could rename it to player. We can do maybe player sprite in this case. I'll show you why later, and I'll show you now actually. So we'll create another object, another sprite object, and in this case, let's make it 16 by 24. Okay, now this will be the bounding box. This will be like a collision box where the player interacts with walls and floors, but we won't see the box. It'll be invisible. Now, why would we do this? I'll explain it as I go, but we need to, since it's 24 pixels high, we want this to rest on the floor so that this, okay, how do I explain this? Maybe I'll explain that part later. So we have this object here, and what will happen is first let's reorder it so this is on top. So the Z order, we send the player sprite to the top layer so it shows over the block. Let's rename this to just player, and this object is what will move around, and the sprite will just follow the position of the block and kind of show what the character is doing, whereas the block is responsible for interacting with the walls and the ground and doing the actual movement, the X and Y movement, and the sprite just is responsible for the animations and which animation gets played and that sort of thing. Okay, why do you want to do that? Well, because the block has a collision. If I go back into it and zoom in, there's this collision polygon, and it's set to the size of the frame currently. We could adjust it and move it around so that like the collision is different, but for the block we just want it to fit the block, so we set it to the bounding box right there. Okay, now that collision polygon is what gets used in the platform behavior that we're going to use. It uses that collision polygon to test whether it's inside a solid object and whether or not to push it out of that solid object. Now, if we had it on this sprite, sprite, player sprite, if we did that, you see here the polygon's much larger, so it would the player wouldn't be able to get closer to the wall if the polygon was set like this. Okay, we'd have to readjust the polygon like this and this and this, and we have to do it for each frame in an animation, and that just takes forever to do, right? You'd have to go through each one, or you could just set it and then right click and apply to whole animation, apply to all animations. But that, it's just, the problem with that is that you might keep editing the sprite throughout your development of the game and add more frames, remove frames, and so you might forget to set the polygon, because if you add a new frame, the polygon's automatically set to the bounding box of the frame, so you'd have to reset it and do that process again, basically. And so it's just easier to not have to think about that sort of thing, and you know, instead of tying the collision box with the sprite, you just create a separate object that has no animation frames. It's just one frame, that's all it is, and so you know that the collision box is always the same and you don't have to think about it. So as this box that collides with stuff moves around, you just have the sprite object overlapping it. It doesn't collide with anything, it just follows around the block object, and everything looks good. You make this one invisible and this one visible, so that all you see is the player sprite moving around. Okay, so we'll go through that process. So the next thing to add in this case is something to collide with. Okay, so what we could add is a tile map. I like using tile maps because I like the way you could just use a specific tile to construct larger levels with it. They're all square tiles, but you could customize it further by having slopes. I'll show you how to do that. But for now, let's clear it and just use a solid image. Let's make it gray, and then let's add some tiles. I don't have the tile map bar. Here it is. I just enabled it in the view property bar thing. So you can just click here, click this to edit it, and then you click a tile. They all look the same, so it's kind of hard to see which one's selected. As you can see, the tile is automatically set to 32 by 32. You could set it to another size. In this case, let's set it to 16. And there's other options here. So I'll use a tile size of 16, and then draw some tiles that the player will interact with. Maybe a wall over here so that it doesn't fall out of the game. Maybe a ceiling. Maybe something to jump onto. Okay. So, and as you can see, there's a dotted line here showing the window, how much of the game that the player sees. That's the dotted line. And then this larger white window is the layout, and it's where the viewport kind of can pan across. So you could have like the whole level set up in the layout. I'm just saying this in case, you know, you're new to this and you don't understand the whole process. Just kind of explain different things as I go. I know it's a little, for some of you, you probably already know all this type of stuff. Okay, so I don't know, maybe we'll put a platform over here. Okay, so we have some tiles set up. That's good. You can click this over here so that you don't keep placing the tiles. So now let's also order that, send it to the bottom of the layer. so that's behind the other objects. And then now it gets interesting, because now we start adding behaviors. We have the object to collide with, we have the object that moves around. So now we could actually start creating the platform behavior. And yeah. So let's go in the projects over here, and down here, where is it? Families. What I like to do is I like to put my behaviors into family objects. That way the behavior can get shared between objects. Since this is a simple example, we don't have to do that, but it's a good practice to do that. So I'll add a family, and I'll add the tile map to the family. So if you have different tile maps, you could add all the different tile maps to the same family, and we could call it tile maps. Okay. Now, if you open that, it shows which tile maps are in there. Now click the tile maps family, and over here it has properties for the family, and you could add instance variables that are shared between all the objects in the family. You have behaviors and effects. So we're going to add a behavior, and we want to add a solid behavior so that objects can't move through it. And this is what the player platform behavior will check. It'll check if there's a solid object, and if there is, it'll make sure not to go through it. So we add this solid behavior to the tile maps. So that's basically all you have to do for the tile maps for now. Let's add another family, in this case player, and call it player. Players, I guess. Maybe you have more than one player, right? That's a good example of why you would create a family. If you have multiple players, and you have player 1 in there and then player 2 in there, that's another possibility. So then for the player family, you could add a behavior, and then go down to, where is it? Platform. You could add other behaviors like a physics behavior. I have a chipmunk physics behavior, which is a third-party behavior that was ported into construct. And there's other custom behaviors that you can download. But in this case, we'll just use a platform behavior because it's pretty simple. So we add that, and now this player object has, as you can see, it now has a platform behavior in it. So you can click down here on the families or the player, and it shows in both cases that it has a platform behavior over here in the properties. So as you can see, there's different types of properties that you can set for the platform behavior. So each object in the family that has the behavior can set their own properties. So like if you have player 1, they could have unique properties from player 2, that sort of thing. So we could adjust these values to adjust, how fast it moves, how high it jumps, and that sort of thing. So now let's do a max speed of 100. Acceleration, let's put it 500, because these values are pretty high for the default, since we have a low resolution game and we just want it to move smaller amounts of pixels. So we don't need such high values in this case, because it's moving within a smaller frame of space. Okay, so jump strength, maybe 100. I'm not sure how these values will affect things, but we could test that later. Gravity, let's try 100. I don't know, we'll figure it out. Max fall speed, 200 maybe. Okay, so double jumps, it has a setting for double jumping if you want to be able to jump twice. We're just going to disable that for now. So you should only be able to jump once, I think. Is that right? Yeah, I'll show you how to be able to jump more than however many you want later. Default controls, we'll just use default for now. Initial state enabled. Okay, so now let's quickly run this, see what happens. So we have the box moving around. As you can see, the player sprite doesn't follow it yet because we haven't added any events to handle that. If we press up, the player jumps and the gravity pulls it back down. So at the moment he's jumping pretty slowly, so gravity's kind of not very strong. It's kind of floating a little bit. So we probably increase the gravity, maybe increase the jump strength. But left and right seems to move pretty well, the speed moving left and right. So that's pretty good. As you can see, when you're moving around, the character correctly, or the box correctly stops when it hits a wall and the floor, when it hits the ceiling. So it works pretty good. And that's without any events yet. All we've added is just behaviors and sprite objects and a tile map, and that's about it. So as you can see, you already have a lot of functionality going on without much work. Okay, so let's go back to the editor and adjust some stuff. We could set gravity maybe 200 and set the jump strength to 200. Let's rerun that just to see how that changes things. So let's move to the right. Let's hit jump. Okay, he jumps much higher. Gravity is not strong enough. So let's just gravity maybe. Let's try 500 gravity. I don't know. Just gotta try different values, see what works. You probably get into more of the mathematical reasons as to why it's jumping certain heights and at certain speeds, and figure all that out if you want. If you're more interested or have more of a mathematical mind. As you can see now, that's pretty good. It's jumping about 2.5 tile heights. So maybe you could make all your ledges about 2 tiles high, and that would be good. So you could just adjust the values so that all your jumps are a certain height, and then design your levels with ledges that are 2 tiles high and platforms and stuff like that. Okay, so let's go back into the editor and let's make it so that the player sprite moves around with the player colliding box. So let's go into the event sheet here. It automatically adds an event sheet. If we look up here, this is our event sheet right there in the layout. If you click the layout, it shows which event sheet it uses. Event sheet 1. So let's add an event. We could do every 0 seconds, or wait, what? Oh, okay. Go back. Instead of doing that, we could, there's another one. Where is it? can't remember where it is, but you could type it in up here, every, and it filters out where it is. Okay, it was in general, so you could just do every tick. So every game cycle, add an action to the player sprite. As you can see, it's a simple process. You just click on stuff and it shows you what you could do, different actions for the player sprite. So down here we could set the position of the player sprite. I like just typing in the coordinates, or if we go back we could set position to another object and just click the player object and the image point 0, and it'll always set it to the player. So let's do that for this case, and it's sending it to the image point. Okay, now let's run that and I'll show you what happens. As you can see, the player sprite follows the block around. As you can see, it's not really positioned correctly. It has its feet kind of going into the ground, and that's not good. But that's because, well, I'll show you why. In the events, we have it setting to the image point. 0 is the object's origin point, which is a type of image point that sprite uses. So if we go into the player object and we click this over here, it shows us all the image points. In this case, this is the origin point, and it's located right here in the center of the object. Okay, now if we go over to the player sprite and look at its image point, it's centered at located at the center of its object. Now that's fine. We don't want to, we want to, like, if we're positioning it by the image point, we want to move one of the image points. But we don't want to move the image point for the player sprite because we'd have to do it for each frame. I mean, we could right click and apply to all animations, but if we add more frames, we'd have to keep readjusting the image point. And that's kind of a hassle to remember to do that. So we just leave it in the center of the frame as default. We don't really use it. I mean, you could add other ones later, but it would be better to not use it for the player sprite and instead use it for the actual player collision box. Okay, so because it only has one frame. So in this case, we could, since the player sprite is kind of bigger and has its feet going below the collision box, we just have to raise this image point up a bit. So you could adjust the values here by making it lower, or you could click it and reposition it. So in this case, we want to be a little bit more precise, so we could just set it here, and this is the position it was at, and we want to raise it up. How much do we want to raise it? Okay, so if the player sprite is 32 by 32 and this is 16 by 24, the player sprite is 8 pixels larger in the vertical axis, and so that'd be 4 pixels on either side of the object since it's centered. So we have to raise it 4 pixels. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That puts it at 8, 8, and the image points are relative to the top left position of the frame. Okay, so that's 8, 8. So that's good. Let's do that. Now let's check to see how it looks. Okay, now it looks fine, right? Because the image point is raised. So that's good. But what if you don't want to move the image point for whatever reason? You don't have to move it. So let's, in this case, it's sufficient to do it that way, but you don't have to do it that way. We could just leave it in the center. That's the center. And instead of moving the image point, we could just, instead of setting it to the image point, we could set the position here to the player object dot x and the player object dot y. That's the x and y corresponds to the origin point of the object, and we could just do -4 like that. So that's another way to do it without even moving any image points. So now when we run it, we'll basically get the same result. Okay? And that's without moving any image points or dealing with that sort of thing. So that's just another way to do it. So now, what next? Okay, let's do some animation stuff. Okay, so here we go. The platform behavior has certain conditions built in that you can use. All right, it makes it a little easy for people to create stuff without knowing too much. So they could do stuff like is jumping, is falling, is by wall, compare speed, is moving, is on floor. So useful stuff that you can use. So in this case, if the character is moving, we want to change the animation of the player sprite to walk. Okay, that's simple. But the player, if the platform is moving, that doesn't tell us anything about whether it's moving on the ground or whether it's moving in the air or falling down or that sort of thing, right? So we need to add another event that checks whether the player is on the floor. Okay, so if he's on the floor and he's moving, then make him walk. Okay, and then we could do an else statement and copy these. Player is not moving, we just invert it. That means the player is not moving. And if the player is on the floor, set it to idle. Okay, so it's standing frame or animation. Okay, so let's run that, see what happens. Okay, so he's standing there, he's not doing anything. We start moving to the left, he changes his animation. Move to the left, changes his animation. Okay, when you stop, he stops. Okay, but as you can see, he's only looking in one direction currently. And also if we jump and move, there's no jump animation and that sort of thing yet. So we'll have to incorporate that. So let's go back and is moving. Let's add an event. Compare speed, what does that do? Okay, we don't want to use that. We need to find a way to check which direction the player is going. Since there's no way to check the velocity of the x-axis, I don't see there's a way. Maybe, actually, there might be a way. If we compare two values using the system expression, let me back up to show you again. So we add an event, we go to the system object, and then in the general events, compare two values. This allows us to compare two values. Now, It gives us object expressions that we could use as well. If you go into the player object and scroll down to the platform behavior expressions, let's see what's there. So we have gravity, we have jump strength, we have moving angle. We could probably use that, or we could use vector x, current x component in motion. So let's use this. Okay, so good. It already has a built-in expression that we could use that will help us figure out which direction the player is moving. So if the vector x is greater than 0, that means the player is moving to the right. If it's less than 0, the player moving to the left. So if the player is moving to the right, let's change the player sprite to, where is it? Appearance, set flipped. Flipped would be horizontally flipped. Mirrored would be vertically flipped. So we want the mirrored. And if the default is not mirrored, and not mirrored means looking to the right, basically. Why? Because I don't know, there's various reasons why. I won't get into that yet. Okay, so else we could copy that and paste it there, and then just change this to less than. Else it's going left, and copy that, paste it, and set it to mirrored. Okay. So now let's go back and run it and see what happens. So moving right, he faces right. Moving left, he faces left. So that's good. So you can see. Now we might also want to make the block invisible, but for now we kind of want to see it so that we understand what's going on with collisions and that sort of thing. But later on you'd want to make that invisible, and all you'd really have to do that would click the object, and down here there's initial visibility, which just change it to invisible and it wouldn't show the object. Okay, so that's just a side note. Okay, now let's do jumping. So there's built-in actions, conditions, like is jumping and that sort of thing. So we could let's just do that really quickly to show you how the behavior makes it pretty simple. So platform is jumping, we just set the animation to jump, and then this platform falling, set animation to fall. Okay, pretty simple. You could add an else in there as well, since you can't be jumping and falling at the same time. Well, maybe you might be able to. That's something to check, because I don't know if falling means you're also jumping. I don't think so, but let's check it. Okay, so move left, you jump, arms are up, and when you fall your arms kind of go out and your legs change. Now if you're walking and walk off the ledge, you'll also start falling, so it'll change into the fall animation. So as you can see, you already have a pretty good variety of animations and stuff corresponding to what the player is actually doing, and that's all done basically through the platform behavior. It makes it a lot simpler just to set up a simple platformer type of game where you run around and jump and that sort of thing. Okay, so now that's good, but like, what if you want to kind of customize it a little bit? Like at the moment you can only jump once. What if you want to jump more than once, or 3 times or 4 times? you know, based on whether you have attained a certain power up or something like that, right? Now, the default way the platform behavior is set up wouldn't allow that, but you could change it so that you can do that. Okay, so you could get a little more advanced with the controls for the platformer behavior. So I'll show you how to do that. So in the case of jumping, we have this condition platform is jumping. Now instead of that, we could add an event. Actually, let's see what here. Yeah, add actually cancel that. Click the player object over here, or actually if you want it to apply to all the players, you'd click the players family object and you'd go to default controls. It says yes. Actually, we could keep that. It doesn't matter if it's disabled or not. We could keep it like that. What it does, default controls do is when you press the default keys of the arrow keys, left, right, up, down, it will signal the behavior to move or jump and that sort of thing. So if you set these to no, then when you press those keys, nothing would happen. Okay, so let's just keep it for now. But in the case of the platform jumping, let's add another event with the thought that the default controls are disabled. Okay, so instead we just create our own way of I'm trying to think how to explain it. We're basically creating our own control method to control the player. So on key pressed, key is down, on key pressed, we could just do on key pressed, and then we could still use the up arrow even though it's a default control. Actually, let's you can basically use any key that you want for jumping. So this is another way of how you would change the keys. Let's change this to W just to show that it could be different. Okay, now when W is pressed, we could add an action to the player to simulate a jumping. So you could go to simulate control, left, right, or jump, and just do a jump like that, right? So that's one way. Or you could do left and right, simulate moving left or right. So we could do that and it would jump. Or you could be more you could even have more control over it and just set the Y vector, you know, set the Y vector, because if you simulate a jump, let's try that. Okay, we simulate a jump by pressing the W key. Let's run that. Okay, so let's move to the right and press jump. See, now we can only jump once, right? We're still limited by the amount the behavior allows for jumping. You could only jump once, or if double jump is enabled, you could jump twice. Or if we want to jump 3 times, we wouldn't be able to do it by simulating, you know, pressing jump. We'd have to do it another way. So instead of doing that, let's just do it all manually by setting the Y velocity. Now the jump strength over here is 200, and that's basically what we want to set to, is but negative 200. because negatives go up and positives go down as far as x and y vectors go. Okay, so let's set it to negative 200. Okay, now let's run it, see what happens. So if we move over to the right, to the left, press W, we could jump, still looks the same. We could compare it to pressing the up arrow key to see if it looks the same. Yep, that's up arrow key, and that's the jump. Actually, yeah, they're about the same height. Okay, so now if we press W a couple times, it keeps jumping, and more, as long as we keep pressing it, it jumps. So that's interesting. That's cool. Well, now we could jump as many times as we want, right? We got around that restriction in the player behavior from jumping only once or twice. Now we can jump as many times as we want. Okay, so that's how you get more control over the behavior. Now, what if you want to limit that? Like that's good. Now you can jump as many times as you want, but what if you only want to jump 3 times? How do we do that? Okay, to do that, basically now you have to basically create your own way of recording how many times the player has jumped. Okay, so when you press the W, we basically need to increment a variable value. So over here we have the player family. We could add in a family instance variable that would be added to all the players. In this case, let's add a variable that's named jump jumps, I don't know, current jump, maybe current jump, I don't know, and default is 0. So when we press W, we could add, actually go back, go to the player object, and then add to current jump one value. So every time we press W and the player jumps, this value will go up. Okay, now we can add another condition that checks the player value, instance variable, current jump. If it's less than okay, 0, you press it, it's 1, 2, and then 3. So if it's less than 3, that would mean that you press it once, it turns the value 1, press it twice, it turns the value twice, you press it a third time, it turns the value to a 3, and then it stops after that. So you'd only be able to jump 3 times if current jump is less than 3, since the default is 0, it starts at 0. Okay? Okay, so that's good. So let's run that. Oh, well, I'll just show you, there's a problem with that. Okay, we jump, and then jump, and then jump. As you can see, we stop jumping because the value has reached 3. So we need to reset that value every time we land back onto the floor. Okay, so let's do that. We can just create another event. Player is on floor, and then set value current jump to 0. That's just a simple way to reset it. So whenever the player is on floor, the current jump is set to 0. Alright, so let's try that. Alright. Alright, so you can move left, right, and jumping. 1, 2, 3, and then you stop jumping. Boom, 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 boom. And 1, 2, 3. So that gives you more of an idea on how to do 3 jumps in this case. And you could further customize it so that maybe you can't jump unless you're falling or something like that. So if you jump down, you have to wait till you jump instead of pressing them all at the same time, basically. You could do that. There was something else I wanted to do that I just thought of, but I forgot what it was. Jumping. What was it? Oh, yeah. So what if you want to only jump 3 times after you attain a power-up? How would you do that? Well, you would have, well, there are various ways to do it, but in this case we could just go back into the player family, add another instance variable, and do like max jumps. Name this variable max jumps and set this to 1. Okay, so now default you can only jump once. Okay, then we go into conditions. Current jump less than 3, you just change the 3 to the player dot max jumps. Alright, instead of typing it out, you could also find it by clicking up into player object, scrolling down, and it has it listed right there. Okay, so we changed the 3 to the player dot max jumps. So if current jump is less than that, the player can jump. Now when you pick up a power up that allows you to jump more, you would just change the max jumps value. We just increment it by however many you want to increment it by, and it would kind of act like a power up, allowing you to jump higher or whatever. That's another thing you can do. You can make it the power up, adjust the vector speed, gravity, that sort of thing. You could change various stuff, not just the number of jumps. So that kind of gives you an idea on how to control it, or enable it and disable it, and that sort of thing. So let's do that. Let's add an object here, and I don't know, make it bluish. Okay, so it's over here, and this is, I don't know, power up. So player the player on collision with another object, power up, destroy the power up, and set the player value of max jumps to, I don't know, set it to 3. So now let's run it. You can move left and right and jump in. At the moment you can only jump once, but hey, there's a power up over there. Let's get it. Okay, now we got it. Now we can jump 3 times. Cool, now we can get up onto this platform. Before we couldn't jump up here, but now we have the platform, we can jump up there, or the power up. Now we can jump up there. Okay, so now that basically gives you a good overview on how to use the platformer behavior and move around with animations and jumping and falling and colliding with the wall. As you can see, it doesn't take much to get a lot of stuff functioning and working using the platform behavior. So that for people that don't really know how to control stuff themselves through events, they can just add the platform behavior and instantly start getting some stuff working. But as you can see, there's other ways to customize it and add a little more functionality to things. So maybe in future videos I could kind of go and look at other stuff you could add. One thing I'm thinking about is adding a wall jump, so being able to jump against a wall and then jumping off of it. I'll probably show you how to do that in another video. Maybe I could do other stuff like grabbing onto the corners of ledges and, you know, hanging off the edge and then jumping or climbing up over stuff, maybe crouching and rolling and attacking and that sort of thing. So I have other stuff that I could show you how to do, but that will probably be in future videos. For now, I think that's enough to get you started with behaviors and that sort of thing. If you have any questions or want me to go over certain things, just leave it in the comments and I'll get back to you. And I'm going to make this available on my Patreon page, this file, so you could just kind of download it and load it and run it and see how it all works. Okay, so there you have it. Pretty simple. So yeah, hope that was helpful.